one way of thinking about how the Bible views men and women is men are the builders and women are the fillers. You can do all you want to try and encourage people to get married and have children, but if you don't address the incentives and social structures, you're going to have a lot of work for very little payoff. That's how turkey and chicken are raised for Costco. You can look at pictures of the barns where each chicken has something like 0.8 square feet of living space. Again, it's this brutalist, communist model of agriculture.
Urmăriți We the People, un podcast 1776. Astăzi mi se alătură înțeleptul meu prieten, John Moody, creștin, tată și gospodar. Bine ați venit la conversațiile We the People. John, good morning to you. Greetings to everyone watching the show. And John, again, I'm very happy to finally have you on. I know we've been discussing on Facebook for the better part of the last 4 years. And again, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. And hopefully we will be doing this again.
Great. In our pre-talk, I always love getting to talk with people from other parts of the world and share notes, talk about what's going on in their countries, how people are responding to the less stable and more crazy season we find ourselves in.
Exactly. And you just prepared the ground for me because I just wanted to tell our audience why a guy 5,000 miles away from the United States is interested in talking to someone in the United States. And the reason is that I believe we, as individuals and as communities and countries, we all have some challenges, hardships, and sometimes indignities that we have to deal with. And I believe that us comparing notes on how each of us are dealing with this might actually help us improve our, our chances of being able to deal with all this stuff. So just to basically, we besides our pre-talk, we didn't have any other talk before. So I wanted to get to know you together with the audience and have this as raw as possible, so to speak. So I'll just begin with a simple introduction that I'll ask you to do. And where did you start and how did you get to homesteading?
Oh, goodness. So I grew up in a town called Youngstown, which is in the corner of Northeast Ohio. In America, it's an area known as the Rust Belt. So this is a region of the country when our government decided to offshore all of our manufacturing. It was one of the regions of the country that went from being incredibly prosperous to being some of the poorest, most hollowed out regions of the country in under 10 years. So my hometown, for instance, if you go back and look at information, it had one of the highest per capita earnings and lowest cost of living in the entire United States. It was such a prosperous city that it had its own theme park and grand ballroom in the city. There's just that much wealth in the city. And then all of the metal work and fabrication and everything was offshored. And by the early 1980s, the city was just destroyed. And so that's where I started life in Northeast Ohio. My dad was him and his brothers had their own pipeline construction company, laying natural gas and similar pipeline all over Northeast Ohio. And again, as the economy cratered and other stuff happened, their business went under. And so I was a very standard living, in a city in the 80s and 90s in America, watching cartoons, eating Fruity Pebbles, playing video games person. And then when I was in college, that's when the Lord saved me. We haven't really talked religion and other things. I grew up kind of in a mildly religious Christian family. But it was in college where reading the Bible, I came to believe in the gospel. And after college, I went to seminary for a number of years. And while I was in seminary, I became incredibly sick. So I'm 6'2", and at the moment I am 170 pounds, if you can believe that. And I think in 2003 during seminary, I got down to 100 pounds. That's how sick I was. And so I had a professor, and I also had an author by the name of Francis Schaeffer I had been reading. And Francis Schaeffer was very big on the fact that modern people, the way they live and view the world, is at war with reality and truth. So it's so much of what defines modern life and the way modern people think is a war on reality, including their own reality. And so my then fiance, now my wife, we started researching food and health and nutrition. And my family thinks I was abducted by space aliens because, again, I was like the kid who I played video games, I watched cartoons, I never ate vegetables. I loved junk food, I loved fast food. And here I am in 2005, advocating for eating, traditional foods, traditionally prepared, and organically, depending on how you define that word, raised. And all these people who knew me were just like, what has happened to him? Whoa, what is going on? But in the course of about a year, I was able to heal, well over half a dozen significant chronic health issues I had been having for a number of years. And that's when, came across Hippocrates saying, let your food be your medicine and let your medicine be your food. Just realizing that a lot of my problems in life, especially my health problems, but a lot of my other problems were self-imposed because of my unwillingness to live by reality and truth. So I started a local food buying club in 2006 in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where we live outside of in America. And because one of the things in America, I don't know how it is in your country, but especially in the early 2000s, it was a Herculean effort to get unprocessed foods directly from a farmer. So on Wednesday night, I'd have to go to a farmer's market because that's where the guy who did not spray all of his fruit had fruit available. And on Thursday, I'd have to go pick up my CSA box from another part of town because that's when that farmer did delivery. And then on Saturday morning, we had to go to another farmer's market because that was the only farmer who was feeding his animals non-GMO grains. And on Monday night, I'm in a dark alley somewhere in town, secretly meeting our raw milk farmer for our moonshine pickup, because during that time, the government in America was going crazy. And so I'm sitting here, I go, I've reinvented hunting and foraging. I just spent all, and we're still having to go to grocery stores too. I'm spending 5 days a week having to go different places to get food. It was time for this stuff. I'm not a liberal who doesn't have kids and, merely has pets I can take along everywhere I go. And that's why we started the buying club, is I saw the need to rebuild that community-based type infrastructure for both doing commerce more efficiently, but also for putting community back into economics.
So just to quickly answer your questions, we do still have a lot of fresh food markets in here. Basically, even in big cities like Bucharest, the capital where I live, you will have a fresh food market, pretty much at least one in every neighborhood. So it's easy to get there. It's true that maybe some of those selling there are still maybe buying their produce from a mass market source, but a lot of them are still producing the vegetables and everything themselves, and it's also the same for the meat and the cheeses and all. So we still do have that. It's because we used to be a very much an agrarian society, and to a certain degree we still are, although that it's still disappearing here as well. And obviously, as you probably imagine, the small farmer is being kind of crushed by big corporations in one way or the other. Here, it's mostly European stores uh, that are pretty much taking up the market, and we have that fighting here as well. So, before we go into the next question, I just want to play a short clip for you and our audience that aired recently, I think a day or two ago on the Joe Rogan podcast. That I think is very relevant to what I'm going to ask. So I'm going to play the clip for you right now.
The planetary issue is the tip of the iceberg of what I think is really, really going on here, which is like a spiritual issue. We are like not fighting for life in this world anymore. And I think that's more of a consciousness issue. You know, we talk about why is no one covering this? Da-da-da. It's like, I think people see it. I think in some way we have like totally lost respect for like the miraculousness of life. That's what our actions are reflecting. Like, we know a lot. We have the technology, the money, and the resources to fix all of this, the planet and health, and we're not. And that's why I think there's something darker happening on like the consciousness level. Step one is us deciding like what choice do we want to make in this lifetime? Do we want to believe that humans are that life is a miracle? This universe is a miracle. Our bodies are miracles, and we want to connect with God in this lifetime. We want to build and respect these temples that are interconnected with the earth to do that, or do we not? And like that's the choice we have right now. And I think we have to take that very seriously. And I think a lot of the political stuff that's happening, Maha, it's all just a reflection of people wanting to find a way to fight for life and not knowing how.
Okay, so now for our Christian sensibilities, the lady might be a bit new agey, but I think she is onto something, especially in what it concerns the people that, and I'm seeing that in atheist people or agnostic people just looking for something, looking for that transcendent something, if you will. And I wanted to ask you, how does homesteading prepare you for this life and for believers for the afterlife?
You know, the Bible is an inherently agrarian book. The Bible starts in a garden. Adam's first vocation is that of a farmer husbandman. One of my favorite things I learned in seminary from my professor, Dr. Gentry, is in the ancient world, who were the most well-known gardeners? Gardening was a kingly occupation in the ancient world. And you know, I don't know how much we want to go down this road of history, but like take one of the greatest books ever written on economics, in the old sense of the word, Xenophon's Oikonomos, how to manage a household. The star character in Xenophon's book talks about how he planted the trees with his own hands in his gardens. Because it was a kingly thing to have a well-managed garden. That's why, you know, what made Babylon famous, the hanging Babylon gardens of Babylon. And then you get to the New Testament, where Jesus is raised from the dead by the power of God. And a lady mistakes him for the gardener. And my professor pointed out This is a very long, it's a joke wrapped in a truth in the Bible, because Adam was a gardener. Jesus himself says, I am the true farmer, the true vine dresser. And then a lady walking through, where he was buried, stumbles across him, and she's like, oh, it's just the gardener doing some work here. So again, Francis Schaeffer, one of my favorite authors, he once said, people were not meant to exist cut off from sunlight and soil by steel and concrete. How we live and the world we surround ourselves in, our outer world reshapes our inner world. So if you're a person whose outer world, and you understand this living in your part of the world, why did the communists move people into those giant concrete and steel buildings that were horrible monotone colors? And because they understood, if you want to reshape people's inner worlds, you reshape their outer world. And so the beauty of living on some land, having a garden, caring for animals, is you can't escape thinking about things like death and suffering. And, this morning, it was 20 degrees outside here. So for you all, I guess Celsius wise, that might be like probably 4 degrees Celsius, maybe.
Yes, I think so. I always get stumbled by this,
And so, but animals still have to be fed, we heat with wood. So every fire I burn is time travel, because the wood I am burning is from a tree that started growing 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. So I'm burning wood from trees that grew before I was even born. So there's this inherent, if you do this right, just an inherent constant reminder of your own finiteness, your constant dependence on systems and things that predate you by hundreds, thousands of years. And the fact that everything I do is eventually going to pass to somebody else. I'm still called to be a faithful steward of what God has given me. But I just, like all of these plants and all of these animals, unless the Lord returns, will one day die. And also, from the dust I came, and from the dust I will return. So homesteading, farming, it leaves you with a constant sense of awe and humility. This is one of my favorite things. You're going to get me off on a topic I could waste the entire show on. But where does all of the energy for life come from? Most people never even think about these questions. Where does all of the energy for life come from? Comes from a giant ball, millions of miles away, a giant nuclear ball of flame hanging in the sky. And it shoots invisible things at our planet, shoots them across millions of miles of space. And some of these invisible things hit our planet. And if you and I were to lay outside in, we call it sunshine, would the sunshine help us? Almost at all. Very little. Like after an hour or two of being out in the sunshine, especially during summer in Romania or Kentucky, we would turn into potato chips. All of that incoming energy does nothing but damage almost everything it touches, except for one thing. These little green plants, these green plants that surround us, are the only thing in all creation who can take invisible energy from a giant ball of nuclear flame that flies across the solar system and hits our planet and they turn it into sugar. And that's like where all of life starts for us. We are completely dependent on little green plants, or we would all die. And the little green plants are completely dependent on a giant ball of nuclear flame. And then even, like, well, the plants contain sugar. That's great. What do they do with that sugar? They trade it with little organisms we cannot even see, where these little organisms get the minerals and other nutrients out of the soil. And so all plants can do is get sugar. That's basically what plants are. They're sugar factories. And everybody else needs their sugar, but the plants need nutrients. They need phosphorus and potassium and calcium and other things. But the plants can't get them. And when you begin to study creation and realize the intricacy and the beauty and the glory of everything, a single inch of rain on an acre of land, I think is something like 500,000 pounds of weight. And that rain, 99.9% of the time, falls to the ground, not even damaging a blade of grass or a single petal on a clover. And it's 500,000 pounds. It just, you're constantly left with a sense of, again, what these people are lacking is this sense of transcendence, that life truly is a glorious miracle, down to the food that gets on your table. Joel Salatin, who I'm friends with, he was quoting somebody he heard last fall when we were doing a conference together. But every second of every day, your body is making something like 1 trillion decisions at the cellular level without your knowledge. And if those decisions break down, you die. Like you're not telling this cell here to open this and take this and trade that. Like the fact that your body functions at that level of complexity with no actual input from you. You're just scrolling Instagram.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, you don't even know about it.
It's just, it gives you that sense of humility, that sense of dependence, and that sense of, I love Chesterton's quote, the problem with being an atheist or an evolutionist is, who do you thank when you truly feel thankful? Right. It's just like, I wake up and I'm just like, I feel the sunshine on my face. I eat a good fresh strawberry, and there's nobody to actually say thanks to, because it's all meaningless in their world. There can be no transcendence, because there's nothing outside of the box we live in.
Right. So you mentioned the fact that, as everyone else, your life is finite, and that you have to leave something to the next generation. And I wanted to get into the very important topic for our days of families and settling down and building a family, which is becoming increasingly difficult and painful, especially in establishing relationships between men and women. And how would you say you would go about finding a spouse in these days, cultivating the relationship in the initial stages, and then growing it into a family?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a father. I have 6 children. The one of the challenges in our day is fathers no longer understand the duties they have, and churches no longer understand the duties they have. It is not my sons and daughters' responsibility to find their own spouses. They obviously have a very important say in who they marry, and whatnot. But it is my duty as a father to make sure I provide suitable opportunities for them to find a spouse. So that is why we're involved in good churches. That's why we're involved in good social opportunities. So one thing I did last year for my daughter and her friends, they were lamenting that so few guys in our social circles knew how to dance. And I took dance when I was in high school. Very well kept secret. So now it's out of the bag. So I took dance and stuff, and my daughter's friends are like, could we do a folk dance club to help teach the boy? Because the girls want to learn to dance better. And they're like, and so we started a folk dance club. And this club just attracts more and more good families all of the time. So one thing we need to do is we need to rebuild the opportunities that help people find a pool of possible spouses so they can form families. One of the things that inspired this folk dance club is I was visiting a friend up in Ohio a few years ago, taking my sons up to compete in a martial arts tournament. And he's like, hey, you're going to come with us to this social event. At night, we're going over to so-and-so's place. And we get to this friends of theirs property, and there was probably 120 kids from like 15 families, all there just to hang out and do folk dancing and play volleyball, all while the parents are there as well, where the parents are getting to know one another, the kids are getting to know one another. And every year they have multiple marriages come out of that social thing they've built. So much of our lives are digital now. People go to work. They usually don't work with people who are part of their social circles. People after work no longer usually do social things, from what I hear. And then they go home and they are on social media. They're watching YouTube and stuff. And so I made a post on my Facebook the other day that there is such an opportunity for good people right now to offer people real rather than virtual experiences. This is one reason I love my buying club. During the coronavirus nonsense, almost every business in Kentucky shut down because of our governor. And so we stayed open basically after 2 or so weeks. And I realized, this is nonsense what they're doing. This is never going to end. If we let them do this, this is going to go on for years and years. So we went back to just doing in-person buying club for our members. And a few months into this, we had one of our members come in, a lady, older lady, who's a member of the club. And again, we're not wearing masks at club. We would not make members wear masks if they did not feel. We're just like, hey, if you're sick, stay home. It's pretty simple. And had a lady come in, and one of us gave her a hug. And she started to cry. And she goes, I have not had a person physically touch me in 4 or 5 months. She's like, I cannot remember the last time I felt another person.
Right.
This is why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has become so popular, because it's such a real thing. You are grappling with,
all the time. Yeah, just hitting the floor all the time and just grappling your your sparring mate. So I actually have a cousin who teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So He still hasn't convinced me to get in, but it's my fault, not his.
Yeah. But it's just people are starved for these kind of things. And the reason I want to address this
Right.
is, the lack of family formation is downstream from these types of things. So you can do all you want to try and encourage people to get married and have children. But if you don't address the incentives and social structures, you're going to have a lot of work for very little payoff.
Right. So how would you say the ideal family should look in terms of roles and hierarchies?
I mean, I'm a patriarchal, the Bible is patriarchal. There's just no way around this. God is Father. From, in the book of Ephesians, Paul says we give thanks to the Father from whom, every name and stuff comes from. The Bible is by nature hierarchical. The Son is truly a son. The book of Genesis is hierarchical. God makes Adam. He presents Eve to Adam. And in the ancient world, naming things was a sign of who was authority. What does a king do when he conquers a country? He begins to rename things. Why? Because he is now the authority. He is the head. He's head honcho. So Adam names Eve. And he's presented to Adam as a gift. And Eve is truly to be a gift to Adam. There's a beautiful balance here in how the Bible structures marriage. Like my wife is truly to be a help to me. And I'll meet boneheaded guys sometimes. And they'll be like, well, I never ask my wife for any input. Like, well, why did you marry her? Like, is she a sack of rocks? Did you merely marry her for the accoutrements and rather what was inside? A wife is truly to be a help to her. There's a reason that in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is personified as a woman. So there's this beauty in the Bible where there is complementary hierarchy. And there are duties given to men, and we're built for these duties. Men are built to protect and provide. Sometime recently on my Facebook, I went through all of the science of biology on men versus women's ability to generate power. An average male without any training punches 2.5 times harder than a woman. Just basic biology. Women suffer joint injuries at significantly higher rates and significantly worse than men in all sports they engage in, because the angle of their hips and the structure of things is not made for combat. So our biology, again, this goes back to what I started with, our very biology, if you're not brainwashed into modern egalitarian nonsense, constantly tells you what a man is good for and what women are made for and good for. And it's only in the modern world that people will try and do unlikewise. And so, my wife and I both love our marriage because we do what God designed us for. I work, I provide. One way of thinking about how the Bible views men and women is men are the builders and women are the fillers. If it wasn't for my wife, I'd be sleeping on a rollout mat in the middle of a dingy room. My wife is who fills things. She is who filled our house with children. She is who fills it with food and beauty. It's like, I build the garden, I grow the flowers, but she is the one who beautifies them and uses them to fill our world. And when a husband and wife understand those roles and do those roles, you get very fruitful, happy households.
I assume, if I'm not mistaken, that you're homeschooling your kids.
Yes.
And this is something that homeschooling is a thing here in Romania as well. Only just the state is being a bit, as always, trying to meddle itself where it doesn't belong, and so you have to basically get your kid enrolled in an umbrella school somewhere else, and then but people do it here, and there's always talk about this. And what I wanted to ask you, if you could just give me a short description on how you, in your family, how you deal with splitting between homeschooling and the rest of the chores and the daily tasks, if there's like a distribution of this task between you and the kids, so that everyone gets enough time to do both the chores and the schooling.
Well, I would say we reject that dichotomy. Chores are school. Our kids caring for animals, our kids cleaning up their rooms, our kids, in America, why did they start a class called home economics? Because the kids, so instead of kids learning to cook and clean from their mother and father, learning how to do a budget, learning how to manage a home, we have to pay the government to teach children this in the artificial environment of a school. So for us, there is no divide. What we have is one final goal for our children. Our final goal is that when they reach adulthood, they understand what they're for, and they have the skills to do that well. And so cooking is a basic life skill for boys and girls. So all of our kids, in our daily schedule, all of our kids over the course of a week are cooking multiple meals. Now the girls do more cooking than the boys, but Abraham, when the angel showed up in the book of Genesis at Abraham's tent door, Abraham prepared them a meal. A guy should be able to cook a couple good meals. So, picking up after yourself is a basic life skill. And then our approach to schooling, we use, especially when the kids are younger, we use primarily Charlotte Mason, which is a very engaging, a lot of reading of great literature, a lot of spending time in nature, and a lot of doing very tactile, practical things. So our house is full of tinker toys and magnetiles and blocks and things the kids, instead of it being a toy that entertains your kid, by the kid being a passive consumer of the toy, our house is full of things that the kids entertain themselves with by engaging with it. So seeing some of the things my 4-year-old will run back into my office and show me the newest thing he built. He'll be like, "Daddy, it's a this. I'm like, I'm not even sure what he's saying, but he knows it's a this. So one of the challenges with homeschooling, and one thing we've learned is, how much kids change, and not all kids change and progress at the same speeds. So our 17-year-old son is already working full time. in a trade where he's being apprenticed. Could never do that if he was public schooled. And the company he's working for plans on making him a crew leader, I believe, sometime next year. Where he will, by the time he turns 18, he will have a well-paying vocation and be in a place to be able to support a family already. Some other kids, like our one son, he'll probably go to maybe 2 years of college to get an associate's degree, because the things he's really fitted for are more that direction. So I think we've lost Wendell Berry, if you've heard of him as an author. I read it.
I did not, but I will look him up.
His older stuff is better than his newer stuff, but he talks about how it used to be the point of college was communities built colleges, and they would send their kids to those colleges, and the colleges would teach things the community actually needed. And now people send their children to college to basically lose them from their community forever. And we need to recapture this idea. What is the purpose of education? The original purpose of education was to enrich your own household and your broader community by raising the level of skills that your children would bring back. And, now, like so many things, college, corporations and stuff, instead of being a multiplicative model, it's an extractive model. We're going to take the resources of the community to pay for this college, and your children are never coming back and adding value in exchange.
Back into the community. Right. How does your family deal, practically speaking, with a crisis? With say, I don't know, maybe God forbid your household gets hit by a tornado. How would you deal with that?
Oh goodness. So we had a tornado skip over our farm 3 years ago. It was one of the most destructive tornadoes in the history of Kentucky. I put the image up on my Facebook just a few days ago because it was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago today. Actually, today is the day. Part of my job as a father, the Bible says, is if I do not provide for the members of my own household, I'm worse than an unbeliever. So Paul's not even saying I'm just like a bad Christian. Paul says I'm worse than an unbeliever. And so we have a community of friends. It's my job as a father to build up assets and wealth so that if something goes wrong, this is why we're part of a good church community. You see this all throughout the New Testament, that when churches and Christians in one area truly fall into hardship that is not caused by themselves, other Christians step in and help. But Paul says very clearly, each of us, as much as possible, are to bear our own load. So I'm not sitting here banking on, if my house burns down, somebody else is going to rebuild it. Now, hopefully, again, because we're part of a good church, part of a good community, we've built up a lot of good relationships. I hope if our house burns down or if a tornado knocks it over, people will help us, but I don't get to assume that as a father. It's my duty to make sure, it's kind of like we heat with a wood burning stove, which it's my duty to do maintenance on that stove to reduce the risk of fire. It's also my duty as a father, even though this is not a pleasant conversation, every year when we get into fall, I sit down with my children and we go over the fire plan. Hey kids, This is the bedrooms everybody now sleeps in. Noah, Daniel, our 4-year-old, you and him share a bedroom. If there is a fire, what is your first duty? It's to throw Daniel safely out of the window and tell him to go to Mr. Chris's house and the girls, and only then do you help me fight the fire. And that's only if it's fightable, it's my job. We have fire extinguishers in the house. We also have this really cool thing somebody invented. If your stove gets out of control or you get a chimney fire, it's called a chimfex stick, where you strike it and throw it into the stove and close the stove, and it will completely smother a fire.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah,
nice.
super,
Yeah, super useful, I would say. Yeah.
And so those are my duties as a dad. What makes God the Father, that he has this forward looking, he is looking for problems and preparing and protecting and providing for those under his care before you ever get to the problem point. So that's what I just have to do as a father. We do regular, when we get into tornado season in Kentucky, we stage water for power outages. We have really deep medical supply kits in our household. And we do tornado drills because our house is not built to withstand a tornado. But about 100 yards from my house is my neighbor's house. And he has a bermed, concrete, reinforced basement. So we know that's where we have to evacuate to. But there's 8 of us. And you're often evacuating, so we have to practice those things. Again, this is just my job as a dad, is to help make sure my household can execute when something goes wrong. And so over the past few years, we've had more practice than we would have liked, evacuating the house a few times because of tornado warnings in our area. But it's always good to see, like, my kids can do this. They know, if they hear me say, and again, like, but on every, any day where we have elevated tornado risk, we already stage in front of our door all of the shoes, all of the coats, and the small number of possessions that we always want to evacuate with. The van is always pointing the right direction to quickly drive over to my friend's house. So a lot of it is, again, like, what are men for? We are to provide this type of preemptive leadership that is to the benefit of those who are under our care and protection. And it's a lot of work, so guys don't want to do it. But it's
Right.
what you were made to do.
So it's interesting because I'm really interested in what is the combination between hierarchy and independent agency in your family. So say you establish a working order or a list of things to do, but then how much your kids, for instance, are allowed or encouraged to have their own independent thinking and adaptation to issues that you might not foresee, for instance, but maybe you gave them a little bit of preparation for.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like how my wife, in the New Testament, women are called oikiodespotes, which is, where we get our modern word despot, and then it's the Greek word for home. Women are delegated the management oversight of the home proper. And again, your listeners, you should go read Xenophon's book on this. It's such an excellent read. I think it was written in the 600 BCs, might be 400s. And it was, that book was the standard book on home management and men and women's duties and roles for 1,000 years. And Paul, in a lot of his writing, when you read that, you'll see how Paul is pulling from, or how that book influences Paul's writing on this subject. So like for my wife though, she has incredibly broad agency to determine what is the best way to clean the house. Or, I've told her, it's just like, we're at a place financially, you need to buy something under $200 for homeschool. You don't need to tell me that. Just go buy it. You don't need to waste. I see so many marriages where both men and women are constantly wasting each other's time, getting approval for their role. So it's like, I manage our family's investments and stuff. If I'm going to buy something today or sell something today, I don't run off and talk to my wife about it. She's busy homeschooling my 8-year-old and 11-year-old. And if she's going to order this tool she needs for the kitchen or this book she needs for homeschooling, she doesn't run back and interrupt me writing a book or being on an interview because, so you can have hierarchy that results in both people having greater rather than less agency and freedom. And so that's the same thing for my kids. It's just like they have duties and responsibilities. My one son, he has to clean. He's responsible for cleaning the cars. And I don't tell him when to do it because he has his own school schedule and when he wants to do his math and when he wants to do this and this, that, and the other. I've never, I've shown him a few times, you want to make sure you do this, but maybe one of the best ways to put this is like with my wife and my kids, my main goal is to be there to help them become more successful at solving problems for themselves. So my wife will come to me with a problem. She'll be like, "Oh, I haven't been getting my workouts in or something. I've the schedule lately has been such that X isn't working." Again, like the father in the Bible, I'm there to bless and help her fix this problem. Well, what do we need to streamline? What do we need to change? Is there a tool or something we need to buy that will get you back time? Same thing for my kids. Like you're responsible for this. What do I need to give you in terms of wisdom or resources to make you more? This is what the Garden of Eden is in a real sense. Adam and Eve are given a blueprint. They're given wisdom and they're given resources. And God says, take this blueprint. I'll meet and talk with you whenever you want. I'll come down to the garden to give you more wisdom. Take this starting glob of wisdom and resources and fill the whole earth with my glory. Because I hate micromanaging men. Because you'll never get anything done as a man if you're micromanaging everyone who's under your care. And it's a huge failure of leadership as a man to have to micromanage people. You should be growing them to the point where they can be highly independent while aligned with your overall mission and goals.
Right. Just a moment here. We're running very close to the time I was telling you that I was going to hold you. And I just wanted to ask you, how much more can you stay if we can go? And that depends exclusively on your schedule. So if you have something to do, we can I can go through 2 or 3 more questions, and then we can do this at a later time. I just have to know how to prioritize this. So it's your time.
This is our last 10 minutes.
All right, cool. Let me see then, just to try and get the most important questions out there. So what advice would you have for those that were born in torn families? How could they not repeat that the events, or the chain of events that led them being born into a torn family? How could they fix that for themselves?
You know, so I'm from a broken family. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom and dad divorced and remarried somewhere between 4 and 5 and 7 times before I graduated high school. One time they divorced each other. They married other people. Then they divorced those people and married each other again. So when I talk about this issue, I have more experience than I would prefer. I think the divorce rate in my broader family is, 60, 70%. Both my brother and sister have been divorced. My brother was divorced twice. So the first thing is know Christ. So as Christians, marriage, one of marriage's primary purposes is to give us a taste of heaven. So it's very hard, especially in the modern world, and especially if you come from bad patterns, to sustain a marriage apart from Christ. Then practically speaking, since I knew I came from a very bad family, starting when I was in college, anytime I met people who had good families and good marriages, I would spend time with them. And I would ask them questions, and I would observe how the spouses related to each other and how they interacted with their kids. And Epictetus, who is a great Greek author back in the day, he said, if you want to be successful at anything, you must first be willing to be thought of as stupid and foolish. So many of us want to be good at something. We want a good marriage, but we're not willing to admit how little we know about having a good marriage. We want to be good in business, but we're scared of letting people know how bad we are. If I've had moderate success in life, it's because I have always not cared one bit to let people know how little I knew or how bad I was at something. So you have to have that kind of transparency with yourself and with some good mentors and other people. And you have to be willing to put in the work. You just have to be willing. If you want a good marriage requires work. It requires forbearance. It requires forgiveness. And it requires, commitment. It's just like, we have 6 kids. We've had days of marriage where everybody in the house is laying on the floor of our living room vomiting. Because we have a stomach bug in the house. And nobody is happy. And everybody is sick. And everything feels like it's going wrong. And those things will produce in you, as the Bible says, perseverance produces character. So you also have to see the reward on the other side of the hard times. Book of Hebrews says, Jesus endured the suffering of the cross for the joy that was set before him. That's the joy on the other side of the cross. So I meet so many people that are like, well, I want a good marriage. I want that picture of being that older man who has 8 grandkids sitting on his lap with a smile as big as Texas. But I'm like, but you don't want to write your wife little love notes. When she's a little crabby, you want to hold it against her. You don't want to wake up and do push-ups in the morning and do 15 minutes of exercise to keep your body healthy. So much of our modern problems is people just don't want to do the work, but they want the reward.
Yeah. So second to last question. And again, I hope I will have you back in the future to go through some more things. We know that the state, and especially the socialist kind of state, sees families and communities as competition. So, do you feel that? Does your family, your community, feel that the state, whether it's local or federal, it's breathing down your necks in one way or another? How is that relationship going?
Yeah. So in America, I try and get people to realize this. There's no area of our life as Americans that the government currently does not mess with. The light bulbs I'm allowed in my home in America are terrible light bulbs because of our government. The businesses I'm allowed to run out of my home in America are completely dictated by the government. 60 years ago in America, that was not, and that's a hard thing for people to realize, is how quickly this has changed. 60 years ago in America might now be, I guess that was 1967. So in the 1950s in America, as a farmer, you could butcher animals on your farm, prepare them in your kitchen, and sell that to whoever you wanted to with no government interference. Now you would go to prison. The toilets I'm allowed to use, and how
do you have a license, right?
So people just don't realize how much of their daily life in America. I call this the illusion of choice. So you go into a grocery store in America, and you'll see a meat aisle that's 100 feet long with 80, 90, 120 different brands of meat that all come from 4 companies. It's the illusion of choice. Americans, because where the choice has been cut off, they don't see. They go to the store and they see, well, there's 24 different light bulbs on the shelf, but they're all crappy light bulbs because your choice wasn't cut off at the store. Your choice was cut off somewhere else. So it's stuff like that it's hard to get people to realize. And, I know taxes are much worse in Europe, but most people don't realize in America, most people lose 40 to 60% of their income in taxes in America right now. Our taxes are incredibly high. So it's, so we feel this burden, existentially, where so much of my daily life now has to be built around how do I circumvent the stupidity, because, just to have a basic business in America, I have all of these we just had a new filing this year. It's like I have to have business licenses. I have to do taxes. I have to do quarterly taxes. I have to do, and now there's a new filing where it's like a financial crimes investigation service filing where you have to list every benefit. And I'm just like, it just never ends.
Yeah, we have similar things in Europe as well, sadly.
Yeah.
So now speaking of, and this is the last question. Speaking of this illusion of choice that you mentioned, especially in terms of food and meats, please explain to non-American audiences the Costco chicken.
Oh,
And how much would it cost you, including your time, animal feed, all that kind of stuff? How much would it cost you to produce a chicken of similar size? And what would be the differences between nutritional differences, health differences between the two.
So I think our Costco chickens $4.99 for the whole chicken. Yeah, so Costco sells these rotisserie chickens. They're $4.99. They actually sell those at a loss. I think, let me see, I should be able to find this quickly. I'm almost positive. Costco sells chickens at a loss. Yes, Costco sells the rotisserie chickens at a loss. They lose they lose an estimated, listen to this number, $30 to $40 million a year on those chickens. So to sell people that chicken costs Costco $30 to $40 million. So I think those chickens weigh like 4.5 pounds. So for me to just raise the chicken, not cook the chicken, just raise a 4.5 pound broiler chicken, would cost me, I would sell a chicken like that for $25. And that would be freshly butchered, not even cooked yet.
Without the cooking, without the rotisserie, without anything else.
And then to do the cooking would probably make it a $40 to $50 chicken for me.
So 10 times as much, at least.
Yeah, it's just, but what would the difference be is my chickens would have seen this thing we talked about earlier called the sun. The chickens at Costco have never seen the sun. I would have you put up an image, but look up how.
You can send it to me, and I'll put it back when I edit this together. So you can just send it over to me, and I'll put it in.
So years ago, I was driving up to a butcher in Indiana, and I drove by a confinement turkey farm. So this is where turkeys were being raised, and it was, it was probably late August, early September, so getting close to butchering time for Thanksgiving turkeys. So this was a building that size of a, part of a football field size building. And the turkeys were in the building so tightly that none of them could walk around. None.
Oh man.
That's how turkey and chicken are raised for Costco. You can look at pictures of the barns where each chicken has something like 0.8 square feet of living space. Again, it's this brutalist communist model of agriculture. Just like we're going to pack people on top of each other to the sky, and you're just going to feel suffocated and packed in. That's what we've done with food, especially animals.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even when it comes to being good stewards of nature with those animals that are suffering. I mean, people say that these people eating meat, they don't care about animals. Yeah, you can care. You can still give them care and be kind to them. And even though some of them will end up in your plate.
Well, I mean, all animals die. This is the problem with the argument. Right. When an animal dies under my care, it's way better than anything that has ever happened to an animal on National Geographic. Do you see what animals do to each other in nature? So the idea that, again, I am completely against modern industrial animal agriculture. It is abusive to animals in every way possible. But this is a good rule for Christians. The wrong use of something does not negate its right use. So we have all of these dumb people running around. Well, because people raise animals in an abusive fashion, I'm not going to eat animals anymore. I'm like, why are you still driving a car? because people drive cars in idiotic ways and kill people every day. You're not stopping driving cars, though, are you? You're not
Right.
being philosophically consistent with this view. And so you could raise animals. Joel Salatin's a great example of this, as are other farmers. But when we bought our farm, there were very few native species of birds left because the farm had been over-farmed and poorly managed. And one of my favorite memories was 5 or 6 years in. Hey, you want to come say hi? Rah.
Well, hello there.
5 or 6 years in, my wife began noticing all of these native species of birds that were coming back and other animals and things that were coming back because of how we were raising our animals on the farm and caring for the land.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. Well, John Moody, thank you so much for... Oh, hello there. It's 3 of you now. Hello. Again, thank you so much for agreeing to come on my show. I'll be waiting you all if you want to come next time. So if your dad wants to come next time, he can bring in guests.
They're going to multiply.
And, yeah. And Merry Christmas to all of you, to the entire family, and all of your loved ones. And again, thanks for all the wise tips and tricks you shared with us today. And hopefully, I'll have you on again.
Yeah,
soon.
thank you so much for having me.
So
Lord
much.
bless you and yours over this holiday in your country.
God bless.